It is 8:17 in the morning on January 24th, 1943, and the jungle on Guadalcanal is deceivingly quiet. Second Lieutenant John George is lying prone on a cluster of large rocks that the Marines had used as a machine gun nest weeks earlier. His heart is beating against the humid earth, but his hands are steady. Through the glass of a 2.5 power Lyman Alaskan scope, he is watching a Japanese soldier. The target is positioned in a palm tree, 190 yards away. To an untrained eye, this looks like the perfect opportunity. The Japanese soldier is sitting low, only 40 feet off the ground, nestled among the palm fronds. The dark shape of his shoulders and head is clearly visible through the optics. It is an easy shot. Center mass. A shot that John George, a state champion marksman from Illinois, could make in his sleep. His finger rests against the trigger of his rifle, a weapon that does not belong in this war. It is a Winchester Model 70, a sporting rifle he bought with his own money and had shipped through the military mail because he refused to carry the standard issue weaponry. He begins to squeeze the trigger, taking up the slack. The glass-smooth, 3.5 pound pull of the trigger is familiar. But then he stops. He does not fire. He lowers the rifle slightly and stares at the image in the scope because something is terribly wrong. The position is too obvious. It is too easy. For the past 3 days, John George has been engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse in the Point Cruz groves. Intelligence had reported 11 Japanese snipers operating in this sector. In the last 72 hours, those snipers had killed 14 Americans. But John George has been hunting them back. He has already killed 8 of them. That means there are only 3 left. And the logic of natural selection dictates that these final 3 men are the best. They are the ones who survived the longest. They are the experts. An expert sniper would not position himself in a low palm tree, exposed to an elevated view, unless he wanted to be seen. This man is not a target. He is bait. John George realizes that if he pulls that trigger, the crack of his Winchester will echo through the trees, instantly revealing his exact location. And somewhere out there, hidden in the dense canopy of a banyan tree or behind a screen of vines, the real shooter is watching that palm tree. He is waiting for the muzzle flash. He's waiting for the American to take the bait so he can put a bullet through his head before he can even work the bolt to chamber another round. This is the terrifying reality of the Pacific Theater that you rarely hear about in history books. It was not just massive banzai charges and artillery barrages. It was a silent, intimate duel between men who knew how to wait and how to kill. John George is alone. He has no spotter, no radio man. He is just a 27-year-old officer holding a rifle that his commanders called a toy, a mail-order sweetheart that they laughed at. But right now, that toy is the only thing standing between him and a Japanese bullet. He takes his finger off the trigger. He shifts his body millimeters at a time, careful not to disturb the foliage around him. He begins to scan the trees around the bait, looking for the trap. He knows the second man is out there. He has to find the hunter before the hunter realizes the ambush has failed. The tension is suffocating. The jungle heat is oppressive. Every dark spot in the canopy could be a branch, or it could be the barrel of an Arisaka Type 98 aimed right at his face. Before we find out if John George survives this trap, I want to welcome you to the channel. We are dedicated to digging up these forgotten stories from the archives, tales of individual skill and courage that get lost in the massive scale of global conflict. If you believe these men deserve to be remembered, go ahead and click that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It is a small gesture, but it helps us keep these memories alive. Now, let us get back to the scope. John George scans methodically. Left to right, top to bottom. He checks every tree within 300 yards of the palm. It takes 11 agonizing minutes. 11 minutes of sweating, waiting, and wondering if he is already in someone's crosshairs. Finally, at 8:28 in the morning, he sees it. 80 yards northwest of the decoy, high up in a massive banyan tree, 91 feet above the jungle floor. The Japanese sniper is positioned in a perfect hide, concealed by vines on 3 sides. He is not watching the trail. He is watching the position where George would have to be to shoot the bait. He is waiting for George. Now, George has a choice. He has 2 targets and a bolt-action rifle that requires manual reloading between shots. If he shoots the real sniper first, the decoy might spot him. If he shoots the decoy, the real sniper will definitely spot him. The mathematics of survival are running through his head. He needs to make a move that the enemy does not expect. He decides to use their own trap against them. He swings his rifle back toward the bait in the palm tree. He is going to trigger the ambush on purpose, but on his own terms. He steadies his breathing. The jungle goes silent. He squeezes the trigger. To understand the gravity of that split-second decision in the palm grove, you have to understand the 72 hours of absolute carnage that preceded it. The jungle around Point Cruz had become a graveyard for the 132nd Infantry Regiment. In just 3 days, the Japanese snipers hidden in the canopy had killed 14 American soldiers. These were not deaths from artillery or mortar fire, where the destruction is random and impersonal. These were precise, calculated executions. The soldiers called them ghosts. There were no bunkers to storm, no fixed positions to flank. There was just the endless green wall of the jungle and the sudden crack of a Japanese Arisaka Type 98 rifle. The enemy knew the terrain better than the Americans ever could. They had retreated west from Henderson Field and dug themselves into the massive banyan trees. Some of these trees were ancient giants, reaching 90 feet into the air with trunks 8 feet thick. A sniper could climb up into that canopy before the sun rose and sit there all day, completely invisible, waiting for a target to present itself. The psychological toll was devastating. On January 19th, a sniper put a bullet through Corporal Davis while he was simply filling canteens at a creek. The next day, 2 more men were killed on patrol. On January 21st, 3 more died, 1 shot through the neck from a tree the patrol had walked past twice without noticing. The battalion commander was desperate. The Japanese snipers were killing his men faster than the malaria that plagued the entire island. The standard issue, M1 Garand, the rifle that General Patton called the greatest battle implement ever devised, was failing them. It was a weapon designed for fire superiority, for suppression, for mass infantry warfare. It was not a surgical instrument. This is where the anomaly of John George becomes so critical. In a military system obsessed with standardization, mass production, and uniformity, John George was a glitch. He was a 27-year-old lieutenant with 0 confirmed kills, carrying a weapon that officially did not exist in the table of organization and equipment. When George had first unpacked his rifle at Camp Forest in Tennessee, the armorer had looked at it with confusion and asked if it was meant for hunting deer or Germans. It was a Winchester Model 70, a civilian bolt-action sporting rifle that George had saved 2 years of his National Guard pay to buy. While other men on the transport ship to Guadalcanal were cleaning their military-issued Garands, George was fretting about his personal rifle sitting in a warehouse back in Illinois. He had actually requested it be forwarded to him through the military mail system. When it finally arrived in a wooden crate marked Fragile in late December of 1942, his commanding officer, Captain Morris, had ordered him to leave the toy in his tent and carry a real weapon. The other officers mocked him. They called the rifle his mail-order sweetheart. To them, it looked ridiculous on a battlefield. The Winchester weighed 9 pounds, and the heavy Lyman Alaskan scope added another 12 ounces. It only held 5 rounds. In contrast, the Garand was semi-automatic, held 8 rounds, and was built to take a beating. Why would anyone choose a delicate, slow-firing civilian rifle over the most advanced semi-automatic weapon of World War II? The answer lay in the mathematics of ballistics and the specific credentials of John George. He was not just an infantry officer. He was the Illinois state champion marksman. He had won that title at 1,000 yards in 1939, the youngest winner in the state's history. He knew what a rifle could do when it was tuned by a craftsman rather than assembled on an assembly line. His Winchester had a trigger that broke like glass at 3.5 pounds. He had spent hours adjusting it at Camp Perry before the war. He could shoot 6-inch groups at 600 yards with iron sights. The battalion commander, facing a losing battle against the invisible Japanese snipers, finally stopped listening to the regulations and started listening to the desperation of the situation. He summoned George on the night of January 21st. He didn't care about protocol anymore. He wanted to know if that mail-order rifle could actually hit anything. He gave George until morning to prove that a competition shooter could survive against warriors who had been trained to die for their emperor. George spent that night cleaning the Cosmoline off his rifle and loading 5 rounds of military ball ammunition, the same .30-06 cartridges the Garand fired, but fed through a barrel designed for precision hunting. The stage was set for a confrontation between 2 completely different philosophies of warfare: the industrial might of the American Army versus the individual precision of a lone hunter. To understand why a 27-year-old lieutenant felt comfortable betting his life on a civilian hunting rifle, we have to step away from the humidity of the jungle and go back to the flat, open ranges of Illinois. Long before the war, John George was not learning how to be a soldier. He was learning the art of stillness. In 1939, at the age of 23, he became the youngest winner in the history of the Illinois State Championship. He was hitting targets at 1,000 yards. Think about that distance. 1,000 yards. At that range, a human being is a speck. You're not just aiming at a target. You're doing complex calculus in your head involving wind drift, humidity, the rotation of the earth, and the beat of your own heart. This was the pedigree John George brought to Guadalcanal. He was a craftsman in a world of mass production. When he unpacked that crate in late December, he wasn't just holding a weapon. He was holding an extension of his own nervous system. The Winchester Model 70 was, and still is, considered by many to be the rifleman's rifle. It featured a Mauser-style extractor and a controlled feed action that was practically jam-proof. But it was the optics that changed the equation. The Lyman Alaskan scope, mounted on top, offered only 2.5 power magnification. To a modern gamer or moviegoer used to high-powered sniper scopes, that sounds pathetic. But in the dense, shadowy claustrophobia of the Pacific jungle, it was perfect. High magnification limits your field of view. You get tunnel vision. The low-power Lyman allowed George to scan wide areas while still seeing through the camouflage that defeated the naked eye. The other platoon leaders called it his mail-order sweetheart. It was a derogatory term, implying he was pampering a fragile object while they carried the rugged, heavy M1 Garands. Captain Morris told him to leave the sporting rifle in his tent. George ignored him. He carried the Winchester anyway, slung over his shoulder alongside 60 rounds of ammunition in stripper clips. On the morning of January 22nd, the debate between the sporting rifle and the military rifle ended. It was 9:17 in the morning. George was crouched in the ruins of a Japanese bunker, looking at a massive banyan tree 240 yards away. The jungle was noisy. Birds, insects, distant artillery. But George had learned to filter that out. He was looking for something that did not belong. Through the Lyman scope, he saw it. A branch moved against the wind. Then, a shape materialized. A man in dark clothing, perched in the fork where 3 branches met, 87 feet off the ground. This was the enemy. A sniper who had been terrorizing the battalion. George did not panic. He did not rush. He adjusted his scope, 2 clicks right for the wind. He controlled his breathing, settling into that familiar rhythm he had mastered on the competition ranges of Illinois. The trigger on the Winchester broke cleanly. The rifle kicked into his shoulder, and the sharp crack of the shot tore through the morning air. 240 yards away, the Japanese sniper jerked violently and fell. He tumbled through the branches, hitting the ground near the base of the tree. George immediately worked the bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. He didn't celebrate. He didn't look away. He kept his eye on the scope. Because he knew something the other soldiers didn't. Japanese snipers worked in pairs. Where there was one, there was always another. He waited. Minutes ticked by. The heat rose. At 9:43, 26 minutes after the first kill, he found the second man. 60 yards north of the first tree, another Japanese soldier was trying to slide down a trunk to escape. He had heard the shot and knew his position was compromised. George tracked the movement. He led the target, aiming slightly ahead of where the man was going to be. He fired. The second sniper fell backward off the tree, his rifle clattering through the branches ahead of him. 2 shots. 2 kills. The mail-order sweetheart had just drawn first blood, and the legend of the Winchester at Point Cruz had officially begun. The mockery from his fellow officers stopped. Suddenly, everyone wanted to see the man with the hunting rifle work. The crack of the Winchester shatters the stillness, and the bait is taken. But not the way the Japanese planned. When George pulls the trigger, the soldier in the palm tree, the decoy, jerks violently and falls from his perch. In that exact second, the trap springs, but George is already moving. He doesn't watch the body hit the ground. He is already working the bolt of his rifle, the brass cartridge spinning out into the mud as he swings the barrel 80 yards to the northwest. High up in the banyan tree, the real sniper does exactly what George predicted. He reacts to the sound. He shifts his weight, turning his rifle toward the location where he thought George would be. That movement is his death sentence. The camouflage that hid him perfectly a moment ago is broken by the sudden shift of a dark shape against the leaves. George has the crosshairs on him before the Japanese sniper can even realize the deception. The second shot rings out. The man in the banyan tree crumples, his rifle tumbling down through the branches followed by his body. 2 shots. 2 kills. But there is no time to breathe. By firing twice, George has painted a giant target on his back. 6 seconds. That is all the time he gets. He grabs his ammo and scrambles off the rocks, diving into a drainage ditch 40 yards away. He hits the mud just as the air above him disintegrates. A Japanese machine gun opens up, raking the rocks he was lying on moments ago. Stone fragments and dust spray into the air. If he had stayed to admire his handiwork for even 10 seconds, he would have been cut in half. The dynamic of the battlefield has shifted instantly. This is no longer a sniper duel. It is a manhunt. George realizes that the machine gun fire isn't just suppression. It's covering fire for an advance team. He moves again, crawling another 100 yards east until he finds a shell crater partially filled with rainwater. He slides into the murky water, submerging himself up to his chest, hoping the earth will swallow him. For a moment, silence returns, but it is the heavy, suffocating silence of a predator closing in. Then he hears them. Voices, Japanese voices, distinct and getting louder. They aren't whispering anymore. They are moving with confidence. George listens as the footsteps stop at the body of the first sniper, then the second. He counts at least 6 men. He is alone, armed with a bolt-action rifle that holds 5 rounds, trapped in a hole, surrounded by a squad of angry infantrymen armed with semi-automatic weapons. Then the voices stop moving toward the tree line and start moving toward him. George realizes his mistake with a sinking feeling in his gut. In his haste to escape the machine gun, he hadn't covered his tracks. His boot prints are stamped clearly in the soft mud, a literal road map leading directly from the rocks to the edge of his crater. He sinks lower into the water until only his eyes and the top of his head are above the surface. He holds the Winchester vertically, keeping the muzzle out of the water, his finger white-knuckled on the trigger. The footsteps stop. A shadow falls over the water. At 10:31, a Japanese soldier steps up to the rim of the crater and looks down. There is a surreal moment of connection. The soldier's eyes lock onto George's eyes, staring up from the muddy water. It is point-blank range. There is no aiming, just instinct. George fires from the hip, the rifle kicking violently against the water. The soldier is blown backward. George works the bolt underwater, a testament to the Mauser action's reliability, and rises from the muck like a swamp monster. 2 more soldiers appear at the rim. George fires, cycles the bolt, and fires again. Both men drop. But he is out of time, and he is almost out of ammo. He scrambles out of the crater on the north side, his uniform heavy with water and mud, and sprints into the tree line. Behind him, the jungle erupts in chaos. Bullets snap past his ears, thumping into the trees. He runs for 90 seconds straight, lungs burning. Vines tearing at his clothes until he dives into another crater, a dry one this time. He presses himself against the earth, gasping for air, checking the chamber of his rifle. It is empty. He has 2 rounds left in his pocket and no stripper clips. The mail-order sweetheart is caked in mud. The barrel is dripping, but it has just saved his life against impossible odds. He waits for the pursuit, but it doesn't come. The Japanese are regrouping, likely stunned by the ferocity of the lone American. George checks his compass. He is alive, and the Point Cruz groves are finally silent. The walk back to the American perimeter at 11:13 a.m. was not a victory parade. John George didn't march in with his chest out. He limped in, caked in mud, smelling of swamp water and cordite, with exactly 2 rounds of ammunition rattling in his pocket. He had just killed 11 of the Imperial Army's best marksmen in 4 days, but the reception he got wasn't cheers. It was silence. The kind of silence that comes from respect, or maybe fear. When he reported to battalion headquarters, Captain Morris, the same officer who had ordered him to leave his toy in the tent, was waiting. The mockery was gone. In its place was a grim realization that the rules of war had changed. The mail-order sweetheart had done what an entire battalion of standard-issue infantry could not. It had blinded the enemy. But the military machine doesn't just want heroes, it wants to replicate them. Colonel Ferry, the regimental commander, didn't ask George for his autograph. He asked him a question that would define the rest of the campaign. Can you train other men to do what you just did? This is where the story shifts from an action movie to something more systemic. George was given 14 Springfield rifles equipped with unertl scopes, leftovers from the Marines, and 40 men who were expert shots on paper but had never killed a man from concealment. He had to take the art of his personal hunt and turn it into a science for the masses, and it worked. In just 12 days of operation, George's makeshift sniper section confirmed 74 kills with 0 friendly casualties. But war has a way of punishing competence. If you think the reward for single-handedly turning the tide of battle is a ticket home, you don't understand the logic of the U.S. Army in 1944. George's success didn't buy him a rest. It bought him a one-way ticket to something much worse. While recovering from a shoulder wound in a field hospital, a reminder that even the hunter can get bit, George volunteered for a classified mission. He was shipping out to the China-Burma-India theater to join a unit that didn't even have a name yet. Later, the world would know them as Merrill's Marauders, but at the time, they were just the Fight 307th Composite Unit. Here is where we venture into the territory of historical controversy. On paper, the Marauders were an elite long-range penetration unit modeled after the British Chindits. Their mission was to cut Japanese supply lines and capture the critical airfield at Myitkyina. But ask any historian who has studied the private journals of the men who served there, and a darker picture emerges. There is a prevailing theory that the Marauders were never meant to survive. They were a political chip played by General Vinegar Joe Stilwell to prove to the British and Chinese that American troops could fight on the Asian mainland. They were expendable, in the truest sense of the word. John George sensed the shift. The jungle in Guadalcanal had been a hunting ground. The jungle in Burma was going to be a meat grinder. It wasn't about holding ground anymore. It was about moving fast, traversing 700 miles of mountains and rivers with no supply lines. Preparation for this mission required a heartbreaking sacrifice. George took his Winchester Model 70, the rifle that had saved his life, the rifle that had cleared Point Cruz, and he began to butcher it. He realized that in Burma, ounces equaled pounds, and pounds equaled pain. The beautiful Lyman Alaskan scope? Too heavy. He ripped it off and replaced it with a Weaver 330, sacrificing optical clarity to save 8 ounces, the polished wooden stock that he had cheek-welded against for years. Gone. He replaced it with a lighter synthetic version. He stripped the weapon of its soul to make it a tool of pure survival. It was a foreshadowing of what was to come. The romantic image of the lone sniper waiting patiently in a banyan tree was dead. The Burma campaign wouldn't be decided by precise shots at 300 yards. It would be decided by dysentery, typhus, and the sheer will to put one foot in front of the other while rotting from the inside out. The Winchester, now weighing less than 9 pounds, was no longer a sweetheart. It was just dead weight that could kill. The hero of Guadalcanal was walking into a trap. Not set by the Japanese, but by his own commanders. If Guadalcanal was a high-stakes chess match played in silence, the Burma campaign was a knife fight in a sewer. The elegance of the single shot, the patience of the hunter, the psychological warfare of the wait, all of that evaporated the moment John George and the 5307th Composite Unit stepped into the jungle of northern Burma in February of 1944. They had marched into a green hell where the terrain itself was more lethal than the Japanese Imperial Army. This wasn't about holding a line, it was about movement. Brutal, relentless movement. We are talking about a 700-mile trek over mountain ranges that maps described as impassable. The enemy wasn't just the Japanese soldier waiting in ambush, it was the typhus, the dysentery, and the mites that burrowed into the skin and caused scrub typhus. Men didn't die gloriously in shootouts. They collapsed while walking, their bodies simply shutting down from exhaustion and fever. And in this chaos, the mail-order sweetheart, that legendary Winchester Model 70 that had dominated the groves of Point Cruz, suddenly became a ghost of its former self. Think about the irony. John George had spent years mastering the art of shooting at 1,000 yards. He had proven that a scoped rifle could change the course of a battle. But in Burma, the jungle was so dense that visibility was often less than 30 feet. You couldn't see 400 yards. You couldn't see 50 yards. Combat wasn't a duel. It was a sudden, violent eruption of noise at point-blank range. You turned a corner on a trail, and there was the enemy. In that split second, you didn't need a precision instrument with a hair trigger. You needed a semi-automatic M1 Garand that could pump out 8 rounds of suppression fire before you even aimed. The bolt-action Winchester, which required George to manually cycle the action after every shot, was technically a liability, and the statistics prove it. In 3 months of constant operations, engaging in 12 separate firefights, John George fired his rifle exactly 3 times. 3 shots. That is the entire tally for the Burma campaign. But here is the thing about those 3 shots. They were reminders of a dying era. The first was at a river crossing. George spotted a Japanese officer directing troops 412 yards away, a distance that the average soldier with iron sights wouldn't even attempt. George dropped him with 1 round. Later, he silenced a machine gun crew at 380 yards. Finally, he took out a sniper, pinning down his squad at 290 yards. Each time George pulled the trigger, the sound was unmistakable. The report of the Winchester was different from the sharp crack of the military rifles. It was a deeper, throaty roar. For a brief second, that sound announced to the battlefield that the hunter was still there. But the Japanese learned quickly. After the first shot, they would saturate the area with mortar fire. There was no time to relocate, no time to play games. George learned to shoot once and then run for his life. By May of 1944, the Marauders had achieved the impossible. They had captured the Myitkyina airfield, opening the supply route to China. But the cost was catastrophic. The unit that had entered the jungle with nearly 3,000 combat-ready soldiers was effectively destroyed. They hadn't been defeated by the Japanese. They had been consumed by the mission. When the unit was finally pulled off the line, they were designated combat ineffective. They were skeletons with rifles. John George was evacuated with them. His war was effectively over. He had survived the snipers of Guadalcanal and the death march of Burma. But as he sat on the transport plane, watching the green canopy disappear below him, he must have realized that the world had moved on. The era of the craftsman soldier, the individual marksman who brought his own tools to work, was ending. The future of warfare was mass production, volume of fire, and heavy artillery. The Winchester Model 70 went back into its case, not as a weapon of war, but as a relic. It would never be fired in anger again. When John George returned to the United States in July of 1944, he did not come back as the hero of Point Cruz. He came back as a ghost in the machine. The Army promoted him to captain and sent him to Fort Benning, Georgia, to teach infantry officers how not to die. But there is a strange silence that wraps around the rest of his life, a silence that is almost as dense as the jungles of Guadalcanal. Most men who survive what George survived do one of 2 things. They try to forget it entirely, burying the trauma under alcohol and silence, or they write memoirs about glory and brotherhood. John George did neither. In 1947, He sat down and wrote a manuscript called Shots Fired in Anger. But if you pick up this book expecting a dramatic retelling of his emotional journey, you will be shocked. It reads less like a memoir and more like a technical autopsy of violence. He writes about the killing of human beings with the same clinical detachment a mechanic uses to describe an engine repair. He catalogues the ballistics, the devastating effects of specific bullets on tissue, and the tactical failures of the Japanese Imperial Army. He describes the smell of the jungle and the rot of the dead, but he never tells you how he felt. Why? Some historians suggest this was his coping mechanism. By turning the horror of war into a scientific study, he could keep the ghosts at arm's length. He wasn't reliving the trauma. He was analyzing data. But there is another theory. One that fits perfectly with the man who could sit motionless for 11 minutes while being hunted. Perhaps John George was never really a soldier in the traditional sense. He was, and always remained, an observer. Look at his life after the uniform came off. He didn't go back to selling insurance in Illinois. He went to Princeton University, graduating with highest honors. Then he went to Oxford. Then he disappeared into East Africa for 4 years to study regional politics. Finally, he settled in Washington, D.C., working for the State Department and various institutes during the height of the Cold War. Connect the dots. A man with a genius-level IQ, Ivy League credentials, a proven ability to operate alone in hostile environments, and a supernatural talent for observation and patience. It does not take a leap of imagination to wonder if the hunter found a new hunting ground in the shadowy world of intelligence. The skills that allowed him to spot a sniper in a banyan tree, the ability to see what others miss, to read the environment, to wait for the perfect moment, are the exact same skills required of a Cold War operative. While George was potentially navigating the complexities of global politics, the rifle that started it all sat in a dark closet. The Winchester Model 70, the mail-order sweetheart, was retired. It wasn't hung over a fireplace. It wasn't shown off at dinner parties. It sat in its case, hidden away. There is something profoundly sad about that image. That rifle represented the pinnacle of a specific kind of American warfare, the era of the frontiersman, the individual marksman who could turn a battle with a single, well-placed shot. But outside that closet, the world was changing. The military had learned the wrong lessons from the war. They didn't double down on marksmanship. They doubled down on volume. The M1 Garand gave way to the M14 and then to the M16. The doctrine shifted to spray and pray. The idea was that if you threw enough lead in the general direction of the enemy, you would eventually hit something. The art of the rifleman was dying. It was being replaced by the science of saturation fire. John George lived long enough to see this transition. He watched the Korean War, Vietnam, and the Gulf War. He saw the rise of technology and the decline of the individual craftsman. He never spoke publicly about the 11 men he killed in the groves of Point Cruz. He never bragged about outshooting an entire Japanese sniper unit. He simply let the legend fade, content to let the world forget that there was a time when a man with a hunting rifle was the most dangerous weapon on Earth. But the rifle remained, silent, waiting, a piece of wood and steel that held the secrets of a disappearing world. And it wouldn't be until after his death in 2009 that the sweetheart would finally emerge from the darkness to tell its story one last time. If you travel to Fairfax, Virginia, and walk through the quiet, air-conditioned halls of the National Firearms Museum, you will eventually come across a glass display case. Inside, resting on a velvet mount, is a rifle that looks completely out of place. It does not have the menacing black silhouette of a modern tactical weapon. It does not have the rough, mass-produced utilitarianism of a battle-scarred M1 Garand. It looks like something your grandfather would use to hunt deer in the woods of Pennsylvania. It is polished wood and blued steel, elegant and unassuming. Most visitors walk right past it. They glance at the placard, maybe read the words, Winchester Model 70, and move on to look at the machine guns or the movie props. They have no idea that they just walked past one of the deadliest individual weapons of the 20th century. They do not know that this specific combination of wood and steel, which was once laughed at as a mail-order sweetheart, single-handedly cleared the coconut groves of Point Cruz when an entire infantry battalion failed to do so. This rifle is more than just a museum piece. It is a physical testament to a philosophy that we are in danger of losing. We live in an era of drone warfare, artificial intelligence, and smart missiles. We are told that technology wins wars, that algorithms are superior to instinct. But the story of John George and his Winchester proves that when the technology fails, when the jungle is too thick for airstrikes and the enemy is too well hidden for satellites, the outcome still comes down to one person, one decision, and one perfect shot. It is a reminder that the tool does not make the soldier. The mind makes the soldier. John George passed away on January 3, 2009, at the age of 90. He took his memories with him, leaving behind only his book and this silent rifle. But we do not have to let the story end there. If you believe that these stories of individual courage and skill matter, if you believe that the human element is still the most important factor in any conflict, then I need you to do something for me right now. Go ahead and hit that like button. Don't do it for the algorithm. Do it as a salute to the men who carried the heavy load so we didn't have to. And I want to hear from you. Are you watching this from the United States, from the United Kingdom, maybe from Australia or Canada? Drop a comment below and tell us where you are in the world. If you have a family member who served, tell us their story. We read every single comment because this channel isn't just a broadcast. It is a community of people who refuse to let history disappear into the dust. Make sure you have subscribed and turned on notifications because we are already digging into the archives for our next file. We are going to leave the jungles of Guadalcanal and fast forward to the rice paddies of Vietnam to meet a man they called White Feather, a sniper who crawled for 3 days across an open field to take a single shot that would become legendary. You do not want to miss that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for keeping the memory of John George alive, and we will see you in the next one.